Analysis of the poem Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening by Robert Frost. Stopping by woods on a snowy evening by Robert Frost. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. Robert Frost's biography. The author of the poem Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening, Robert Lee Frost, was born in March 26, 1874, and died in January 29, 1963. He was an American poet that had a very difficult personal life, where he faced a lot of problems. Beginning in 1897, Frost attended Harvard University, but had to drop out after 2 years due to health concerns. He returned to Lawrence to join his wife, Eleanor Frost, who was pregnant with their second child, daughter Leslie, 1899. In 1900, his firstborn son, Elliot, died of cholera. Frost moved with his wife and children to a farm in New Hampshire, and they attempted to make a life on it for the next 12 years. The weather there was cold, humid, and snowy. Though it was a fruitful time for his writing, he wrote Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. There, for example, it was a difficult period in his personal life. After Elliot's death, he and his wife gave birth to 4 more children: Carol, 1902, Irma, 1903, Marjorie, 1905, and Eleanor, 1907. Carol committed suicide in 1940. Irma developed mental illness. Marjorie died in her 20s after giving birth, and Eleanor, his last child, died 1 day after her birth. Frost and his wife, Eleanor, attempted several endeavors, including poultry farming, all of which were unsuccessful. Despite such challenges, it was during this time that Frost acclimated himself to rural life. In fact, he grew to depict it quite well and began setting many of his poems in the countryside. Although he had a hard and difficult life, Robert Frost won the Pulitzer Award 4 times, the Burlingame Award, the American Academy of Arts and Letters Gold Medal for Poetry, and some others. Besides that, he was nominated for the Nobel Prize of Literature 31 times.
Analysis of the poem. The explicit meaning of the poem is that there is a person with a horse between a frozen lake and the woods in the snowy and dark evening with a lot of wind. The person looks at the woods and thinks that it's lovely, dark and deep. In the end, the person went away because it's evening and he has promised to keep. There are a lot of implicit meanings, but our interpretation is that the person wants to die to escape of his life, but he still has promises and responsibilities to keep. He wants to run away from his problems and death. In his point of view, it could be the solution. It's lovely, dark and deep. So the persona is trying to decide if he is going to commit suicide or not.
According to our interpretation, there are 3 main themes in this poem: overcoming problems, choices, and isolation. Overcoming problems because the persona talks about how attractive the forest is for him and how difficult it is to decide if he was going to stay in the woods or return to the village to face his life. And in the end, he decides to return, overcoming problems and doubts. Choices because during the poem, the persona makes choices that his horse doesn't agree with. The main one is if he should return to the village or continue in the freezing woods. Isolation is one of the other themes because it's a lonely poem. The persona is isolated but glad to be somewhere that no one can watch him. Glad to be in the woods over in the village. Besides that, nature makes the feeling that things are more lonely because it is freezing, cold, snowing, and dark. The main symbols in the poem, according to our interpretation, are snow, horse, woods, and sleep. The snow represents the persona's problems and obstacles. It's something difficult to exceed. The woods and the sleep can represent death and escape. The sleep in the last stanza, in the explicit way, can be that he is tired, but has a long way before he can really sleep and rest. But in the implicit, can be that sleep means death, escape from his reality, but he can't kill himself, because he has miles to go before sleep. He can't stop in the moment. His journey isn't in the end yet. He has promises to keep, things to do first. The woods can also represent death and escape, because it's something kind of unknown, mysterious, lovely, dark, and deep. And if he had chosen not to return to the village, he would be escaping from his problems and real life, or perhaps he would kill himself, also escaping reality. The horse represents logic in the poem, because it doesn't agree with the persona's decisions to stay technically dangerous out in the frozen woods. The horse thinks it weird to stop without a farmhouse near. It's showing that it's awkward, showing that it doesn't make any sense. It's the logic part of the persona.
Ezra Pound theory. Stopping by woods on a snowy evening is considered a phanopia and a logopia. According to Ezra Pound, a phanopia is defined as casting of images upon the visual imagination. Logopia is defined as poetry that uses words for more than just their directed meaning. The reader needs to interpret to understand another sense and perhaps the real notion, content of the poem. When you read Stopping by Wood in a Snowy Evening, instantly images are created in your head, images of a person with a horse in the middle of nowhere, trying to decide where to go and what to do next. According to Robert Frost's biography, it's possible to find some meaning behind only the definition of the word used in the poem. He had a hard life, so we can interpret the poem as different way, finding implicit meanings, for example, or interpretation, that is the persona trying to decide if it was going to commit suicide or not. That is why we can consider the poem as a phanopia and a logopia. Structure of the poem and uses of poetic devices. In this poem there are 4 stanzas, each one with 4 verses. In the total there are 16 verses. Analyzing the structure of the poem, we can realize that the end of the words are the same in the order A, B, B, C, B, C, D, D. We can realize that the poem has poetic devices, repetition, metaphor, and imagery. Repetition can be seen in the last stanza and miles to go before sleep. Metaphor, because the poem is considered a logopia, so the words used not necessarily or used with a real meaning, can transmit some other message. And there is imagery also, because it's considered a phanopia. When you read the poem, images are created in your head.
Stopping by woods on a snowy evening.
Whose woods there are, I think I know. His house in the village though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his wool fill up with snow. My little horse must think queer to stop without a farmhouse near. Between the wood and the frozen lake, the darkness even of the year. He gives his harmless bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep, the easy wind to and Donny Flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promised to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep.